and welcome, Minister, to the House for this afternoon's motion. I'm going to stand here now to propose the motion that this House should be reformed according to two principles that are cornerstones of any genuine democracy, and that this House should be reformed with a sense of urgency by the immediate establishment of an all-party task force so that we have meaningful reform in advance of the next Seanad general election. While some of the criticisms leveled at the Seanad during the campaign are unfounded and simply untrue, it remains beyond dispute that this House is not democratic. It is not as effective as it could be, and the Seanad electoral system is elitist. So, what is the government willing to offer the people now that they have spoken? Well, let's look at the public record. Firstly, on the 18th of December, the Taoiseach ruled out proposals that would give every citizen a vote in Seanad elections. He did this on the basis that he did not, quote, believe that the framers of the Constitution intended that you'd have universal suffrage for the Senate in the same way as the Dáil, end of quote. I will rebut this declaration in a few moments. But the second thing we have on our public record now is the government's counter-motion to ours. Effectively, this places on public record the minutes of the meeting that the Taoiseach had with party political leaders last December. So the government's offer to the people in these minutes is this: as little reform as possible, as slow as possible, with no sense of urgency, and certainly no reform in time for the next Seanad general election to provide the people with what they are entitled to in a democracy: one person, one vote, and universal suffrage. What the government offers the people this evening is simply minutes of a meeting that happened over 6 weeks ago. The government should stop underestimating the people. Our motion doesn't underestimate the people. Further, it reflects the growing consensus across independents, opposition parties, some individual members of government, and relevant civil society groups that the bottom line requirement for the next Seanad is that every person should have a vote and the franchise should be extended universally. It reflects primary elements of my bill with Senator Quinn, Senator Crown's bill, the recently published Fianna Fáil bill, and proposals from Sinn Féin. Our motion is framed with a cognizance of the Constitution. Article 6 of the Constitution acknowledges that it is the, quote, right of the people to, quote, designate the rulers of the state. It is the right of the people to choose who govern them and who make the laws in their democracy. Article 18 of the Constitution clearly does not exclude universal citizen suffrage in Seanad elections. It does the exact opposite. The Constitution simply provides that, quote, general elections to the Seanad shall be held on, quote, the system of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote, and that law shall regulate those elections, not the Constitution. The Taoiseach's claim that the Constitution must remain rooted in the political convictions of the 1930s and cannot be reinterpreted to fit modern needs is not only archaic, it disregards a well-established judicial principle that the Constitution is a living document. The generation who wrote the 1937 Constitution are the same ones who fought for our national freedom. They gave us a free Constitution to empower our people politically, socially, and economically. The whole raison d'etre of this country's quest for sovereignty and national self-determination was to ensure that Irish people in every generation would be free to chart their own future according to their times. So it is incumbent upon the current government to respect the freedom of our people so that they can choose who make our laws. As long as the Seanad remains unreformed in its electoral system, disregarding the democratic right for every person to have a vote, the government is not respecting the constitutionally embedded freedom of our people. And make no mistake about this, the power now for this kind of Seanad reform is in the hands of the government. If we don't see this reform, this kind of reform for the next Seanad election, the fault will rest with this government, and that will start here in this chamber this eve, if this motion doesn't pass. Two fundamental principles. Let me come then to that first component of our motion, the two fundamental principles of Seanad reform, universal suffrage. It's a principle, the most basic principle in any election process. In a democracy, every citizen should be entitled to vote for those who govern them. Those who are opposed to universal suffrage for the Seanad cite a range of reasons as to why, in their view, it should not be used in Seanad elections, but I don't think that those arguments hold much water. Some have suggested an extension of the franchise will result in a Seanad whose makeup mirrors that of the Dáil. This is not true. It is inaccurate. Geographic constituencies elect the Dáil, with voters in a certain area only being permitted to vote for candidates running within their geographic constituencies. In contrast, the Seanad would be elected by a national electorate. So, where a voter lives and where the candidate lives will be of zero relevance in a Seanad election. There have also been some suggestions that if the franchise is extended, the Seanad will somehow rival the Dáil. The role of the Seanad is set out in the Constitution. It is principally a house of the legislature. The Seanad plays a crucial role in ensuring that legislation is given a second look based on expert and informed views, knowledge and practical experience in a range of specific sectors, as identified in our panels. In spite of its valued role, though, as a house of legislation, too often the Seanad's role in scrutinizing the law is dismissed in the interests of political expediency. All too often, government views the stages of the legislative process as being a box-ticking exercise, so the guillotine is regularly applied to debates. This is not the way to make good legislation. Take a look even this week at the Seanad schedule. It's another Seanad light week. Where is the legislation now when we have time for it? Why isn't it here? Where there is a political will, there is a way. But let's be clear about this. There's no truth in the assertion that a Seanad that is elected by the population will rival or even mirror the Dáil. The Seanad's role is set out in the Constitution and also in standing orders. The Seanad complements the Dáil. Extending the franchise will not alter the role of the Seanad. One person, one vote. The vast majority of members in this House are elected by a small cohort of local authority members who could have 5 or 6 or 7 votes each. Yet the ordinary person who didn't have the privilege of going to a certain university has no say whatsoever in the makeup of this House. That is indefensible. One person, one vote is about ensuring that all voters are treated equally. The views of one person in a ballot box are just as important as the next. Why should we tolerate a situation where a teacher or a nurse might have one vote, a person who never had the privilege of going to university or third level has no vote, and local authority members have 6 or 7 votes? And as members of the government said repeatedly during the campaign, it's elitist. It has to end, and we must work collectively to bring it to an end. While the Taoiseach's strategy to extend the franchise of the university panels to all third-level graduates is welcome, it will not bring about an end to elitism on its own. In fact, on its own, it will exacerbate elitism. And such a limited statutory change would leave 90% of the Seanad totally unaffected. The second part of our motion is all about time. We need the immediate establishment of the task force to consider Seanad legislative reform, starting with the 2 fundamental principles. Why is this so important? If the people are to be given their constitutional right to a vote in a Seanad general election next time round, we must have a bill passed a bill to that effect by the end of 2014. Why is that? Because it will take some considerable time in 2015 to set up the new electoral process and system, to inform the people of their right to vote and a way of registering and voting for the preferred panel choice. If this does not happen, it will be at least another 7 years before the possibility of this kind of reform opens up again, and the people need to know this. To conclude, if the Seanad is reformed now, this will ensure that after the next general election, we can have a Seanad for the people, a Seanad elected by all of the people. The Seanad then would be a truly democratically elected chamber in which the aspirations of the 1937 Constitution would be met. And that would be the essence of democracy.